So the month of Shevat, and it is a month where there is a foundation of God, there is a way of God, but we have to choose the righteous foundation. So I was just, every time when it comes to first fruit, I always look at what I have taught the year before. And because the prophetic cycle of God is very interesting, it's always the same when it comes to the month. And it's not being religious, it's not like you're using a formula, but the prophetic cycle of God just happens as the Lord leads us from time to time. So this is a month where we sort of step back and begin to make a consideration. Do we want to choose the ways of God, or do we want to continue on our way? Because we are just 2 months off Passover, so it's a very interesting time. And it's a time where most of us are at home and we're concerned about what's happening, but we need to understand that God is still in control and His ways are higher than our ways. Okay, so welcome to the first fruit celebration of Shevat. So if you're at home, you have your own food, feel free to do your own communion. People want protection, or maybe some of you are not feeling well. You feel free to do communion, because that's a way for you to demonstrate that the blood of Jesus has authority over whatever sickness, whatever infirmities that you have. And this is the first one for the year 2021, right? So we had the last first fruit just December, then head of the year. So we are now 2 months away from Passover. Now this year, Passover is very different, I feel, because in the past, we always say it's a time to cross over. But this year, I feel we have two choices. We can cross over, or we can choose to remain in a place of wilderness. So just imagine, when you study the history of Israel, the first Passover was very important because they could have obeyed God and then crossed over fully, but they didn't, and they went back into 40 years of wilderness. Then there was another opportunity, this time under Joshua and the new generation. But still, if people do not make the choice, they will be stuck in the wilderness. So I just felt like 5781 is that sort of year. Now remember, the year 5781 represents a season of contrast. So we're comparing the ways of God. So there is the Lion of Judah and then the ways of dragon. Very interestingly, when you read Revelation 12, it's the red dragon, right? The red dragon is coming. And so this is a year we need to learn to draw a kingdom line. And I remember in the eyeing season when we first started off, one of Chuck Pierce's prophecy really is like this. He said we had to learn how to draw a line. Otherwise, a line will be drawn. So that means we either choose kingdom, or God will draw a line and say you are in or you are out. So that's very interesting, I find, that this is a year of contrast because we are seeing the manifestation of the red dragon in a very, very obvious way. Now, remember, 5781 is a year, Pey Aleph. Just a reminder again, it is a Lion of Judah versus the dragon. And very interestingly, James Nesbitt, prophetic picture, he put a red dragon. Okay, I'm not saying this is a Revelation 12 dragon, but the contrast is very obvious. And you can just see the enemy of God is just becoming louder and louder. But I just feel like this is an opportunity for the ecclesia to really find its voice. Let the Lion of Judah roll out in this season. So it's for the whole year, 5781, but we are like coming into the 6-month stage, which is the Passover time. So just remember, the decade of Pey is all about contentions. And overall, it is all about speaking against the lying and deceiving serpent. Because Pey is about the voice, the authority. So there is that authority. And in the past season, maybe you have been very quiet. Maybe you have been very reserved. But this decade is a time to express. Now, I'm not saying that you go out and just simply say things, post things online and things like that. A lot of people use social media as an outlet for their emotions. Just very emo. Don't do that. Don't expose yourself. But there is an authority for your voice that will begin to shift things around you. So that's very important, okay? This is a decade to challenge. Remember what serpent said to Eve, right? did God really say? So this is a season you have to begin to question the propaganda, you begin to question the lies of the enemy. Because remember, the enemy is, Jesus said Satan was the prince of the air. He controlled the airwave of communication, even though the ecclesia, the body of Christ, has been given authority to stop that. But, we have not been very successful in that. So this is a decade where God will begin to cause us to rise up. So the apostolic foundation must rise so that we can contend and produce kingdom results. Now, I talk about contention. It's really when you're fighting to obtain glory. You're fighting for a success. So we are now coming into the last 2 months. Now, remember I talked about the final quarter. When you play a game, there's a final quarter. And, if you watch football and of basketball, I think we have more football fans here, okay? So it's like, if it's the last 10 minutes, you're like, your team is down 4-0. You're like, oh man, it's like, don't want to watch already. And, I know we have Manchester United fan or Liverpool fan, a lot of Liverpool fan here. And many of you remember the story of Istanbul, right? Istanbul is like, my team was on the other side. It's just unbelievable. And I have a friend who watched the game after 3-0 down. He switched off the TV and went to sleep. And he wake up, he's like, what? Cannot believe it. So anyway, it's like we need to understand that the game is not over yet. We are still contending. We are still playing. And that's why I know some of you are Manchester United fans. They are doing not too bad. But when during their previous manager, remember Alex Ferguson, his team is always well known for last minute goal. And it's like if you play them, it's like 85 minutes, 89 minutes, somehow they can do it, and it's just very, very annoying, okay? And for those who don't like them. So that's why contention is all about we're still in a game, we are not out yet. Despite what is happening, the Lord will cause us towards a path of victory. So you remember I was just telling you, I was watching Apostle Chuck Pierce and Sid Ross, right, on Supernatural today, and they were just talking about all the things that's happening, especially the political realm in United States, and it's just very distressing because so many good things have been done in terms of relationship with Israel, because Sid and Chuck, they are both trying to encourage the expression of one new man, and so eventually Sid was asking Chuck, how do you see all these things? So he was pushing the prophet for an answer, So, you can see Chuck is like, I'm just telling you this, I'm telling you this. But Sid was like, I want to know what you think. So eventually, Chuck just say 2 words, we win. So I think just to shut Sid off, So it's very interesting, it's very important we understand the end game. Even though Red Dragon came out in Revelation 12, in the end, we win. So that is very important in this month, and a month where we kind of step back. Okay, so let's look at God's calendar, and I just feel like we need to have an understanding, because when you look at Tishrei, which is 9 o'clock on the left side, that's the beginning of the year, but God gave us 6 months. Everyone say 6 months. All the way to Nisan, Passover. So Nisan, according to Exodus, was the beginning of the year. But that was only the 6th month if you follow the original calendar. So God actually designed the calendar to be like this. 6 months to prepare for crossover, and then 6 months to fully express. So that's the cycle. It's very interesting. It's very prophetic. Now I want to remind you all that fear is actually a spirit. And that is what Elijah saw. When Jezebel talked to him, he saw something which caused him to... It's just very strange. Every time I read that story, I just kept wondering, what can cause a great prophet to run away like that? It's just not logical, right? Actually, it's very logical. You think about, now, if any of you watch the Star Wars Episode 8, right? So it's like, eventually Luke Skywalker went into exile. That's why even the actor Mark Hamill was saying that was so out of character. How can that happen? So we are all like a bit pissed off. But anyway, he ran away from something. Something caused him, and it's not because he is lacking power or things like that. He is like incredibly powerful, but something caused his emotions to be unstable, and he ran away. So that's the same thing with Elijah. So Tevet, last month, we have to deal with this. So all these internal and external factors can cause us to become unstable, but God, everyone says, but God. So that's the purpose of first fruit. First fruit worship, as we come here, we have just a few people here, but as you celebrate at home, as you take communion, it's a way for us to cleanse this emotion, to keep it in check. You see, first fruit at the end of the day is very simple. It is about you acknowledge the goodness of God and that He is in control. That's why this month is all about there is a righteousness of God, there is God's standards, and it's really our choice. Do we want to accept that or not? You see, when we give God the best, we do what is right, and then we prevent sin from entering into our hearts. That's Genesis 4:7, the principle of Cain. Do you remember that Cain was given an opportunity to repent after the seed of all the bitterness developed within him? And God said, if you do what is right, then you'll be able to advance. But we know what happened, right? He continued and he murdered his brother, and then it just caused hell to break loose. So right now we are seeing national, international turmoil. I mean, don't look at other nations, just look at our own nation. Now if you begin to just study, what is the implication of emergency? A lot of people say, oh, it's no big deal. Actually, it's very big deal in terms of the legality. For example, the governments can, two things which really caused me to see from the legal perspective. First, during emergency, the government cannot be sued if it is doing things in good faith, okay? Now, I don't really trust our court system to do anything in favor of people who might bring an action to government. Then the other thing is, private property can be taken by government if they felt it is needed. See, this kind of thing kind of make you feel like, there is a more sinister plot behind this. So we are seeing this sort of turmoil. Nevertheless, it is still a month to focus on God. It is not a month to focus on the turmoil. So we can choose a righteous foundation and embrace the superior ways of God. Okay, so I want to talk about righteousness. Last year, I look at my teaching. Righteousness is just something you can teach over and over. There's just so many dimensions. But today I decided to start with this. Genesis 6:9. Noah was a righteous man. Now, why I chose this? Because this was the first time in Old Testament the word righteous came out. Okay? And righteous and blameless. So these two words are somewhat related. So righteous came from the Hebrew word sadiq, which means lawful, just, right, correct. So basically it's like the person can do no wrong. The person is like morally correct and upright. Interestingly, it is the same word used by Abraham when he was negotiating with God. Remember, he said, Sodom and Gomorrah, if I can find how many righteous people, and eventually still cannot. So we're talking about the correct behavior. So it is very close to the typical understanding of righteous. That means you are flawless, you are without sin, that kind of thing. And then blameless comes from the Hebrew word tamim, which means complete, wholesome, and in integrity. It can be figurative, that means it can be a representation of how a person lives his or her life, or it can refer to the moral quality. So when we combine these two words, we can begin to explore the understanding of righteous, which is really our position before God. So it's not really what we do, it's how God sees us. That's the whole concept of righteousness. So Noah can be righteous, and actually if you study his life, remember after the flood, what happened? He got drunk and things like that, and there was incense and things like that. So there was a lot of things that sort of just caused, he wasn't perfect in a human sense, but God nevertheless still declared him as a righteous person. So it is a concept of justification. That means it's not so much what you do, but it is that you are being made or declared right by God. Now, this is a concept that we understand because every time we want to share gospel, and eventually we say, justification. It's not a very hard concept for most Christians. And Romans 5:1, very familiar verse, right? Therefore, having been justified by faith, so now we see how we can get justified. It's not your good behavior, it's your faith. We have peace with God. And a few chapters before, Apostle Paul began, and he said, for in the righteousness of God is revealed from face to face as it is written. But the righteous man shall live by faith. That's actually a verse from Habakkuk 2:4. So you can see even in Old Testament, God is already leading his people to develop a life of faith. Because without faith, it is impossible to please God. So even as men need to have faith, so we supply the faith, but true righteousness can only be obtained from God. I think we need to understand that, because sometimes we are like, okay, as long as we have faith, actually we have to follow a standard of God. I have seen so often people talk about, I want God, but then when the standard of God is being revealed to them, they don't want that. So it's a bit of contradictory, a bit of double-minded, because on one hand you say you want God, but on the other hand, when you look at the standard, you say, I don't want it. So that's the thing, because he has a foundation, he has a standard, and those cannot be obtained except for his grace. That means God has to want to give it to us. And he has given that to us, okay? But nevertheless, this is a month to understand. His ways are higher than our ways. So there are times we cannot understand, and even throughout the Bible, so many people have great relationship with him, but they are still like confounded by some of his decisions, some of the happenings of God, because his ways cannot be fully understood by logic and our human standard. Okay, so let's contrast that. You see, we are all justified by faith, and so we begin to think, what is righteousness then? So there is a verse that really helps us to understand that what we do really is insufficient. See, Isaiah 64:6, also a very well-known verse, and all our righteous deeds are like a filthy garment to God. That means no matter how much you do, you can't do it. Then when you look at Romans, we look at the book of Galatians, Apostle Paul, he has a very legal mind, okay? So he was talking about, okay, you want to be justified by your good deeds. How perfect do you need to be? You can't even fail a single thing. So that's why when you look at, a lot of contemporary religion, you look at Hinduism, you look at Buddhism, they want to achieve perfection, but cannot be. So that's why they go through many cycles of incarnation. Why? Because this life, not so perfect. Hopefully the next life, you'll be more perfect. Then, if you are very bad, karma will come, now you become a rat or whatever. Then you have no chance. It's very ridiculous. So the thing is, no matter what we do, it's not good enough. And that's true. That is true. And I think this righteous, the word here, the Hebrew word here is sadaka, which has a closer meaning to a sense of justice, righteousness. So you can see that now this righteous is not really the righteousness of God, but it's our own righteousness, our own standard. Now, if we ask ourselves, we all have our own standard of justice, right? And righteousness. And it's often based on our feelings. So in this pandemic, you can see. So for example, let's say a person tested positive, what should happen to them? Should they be quarantined? And a lot of people will, quarantine for a long time and things like that. But when it happens to you, when you cannot work for 1 month, you lose your salary for 1 or 2 months, your tone will change. That's why we all have our own standard of justice. It's a fluctuating kind of thing. It's based on our feeling. We all have our own paradigm and framework of interpreting what's happening. So some people will be like, it's very dangerous, cannot touch this, touch that. It's okay. We will interpret based on our upbringing, our moral, our values. So we all have that. But nevertheless, this is the month we have to begin to understand this verse. I already said it, but let me just say it again. Isaiah 55:9. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. So when we talk about submitting to the righteous foundation, it is really embracing this verse and say, God, your ways are higher than my ways, even though I do not fully understand that. So that's a challenge for some. So that's why God's way is a superior way. So let me just remind ourselves again why we are here to celebrate, because this is a week of first fruit, and first fruit is always a time we come to acknowledge the ways of God are superior. So that's why we give first fruit in terms of our giving, in terms of our time, in terms of our emotions, because we want to set it right in terms of comparing it with the standard of God. So as the saying goes, this is the way. You know, some of you, if you watch a certain show, this is the way. But interestingly, the early church in the 1st and 2nd century, Christians were initially called the people of the way. Do you know that? So it's like there is a way, and it is the way of Jesus. We subscribe to the ways of God. And how do we discern? It is by tapping into the mind of Christ. That's why prophecy becomes important. And in fact, prophecy, in terms of hearing the voice of God, is more important than the prophecy released for third party. That's why when you all came to activate for hearing the voice of God, it is really for yourself to be able to tap into the mind of Christ. Then, of course, those with the gift of prophecy, those with the redemptive gift, they are able to bless other people. But this is first and foremost for ourselves in terms of discerning. Then the Lord gave us conscience, which needs to be developed. So we have freedom and liberty within the framework of the way, okay, the way of Christ. Now, I want to say this again because so many times, and I remember when I was younger, I was in this category also. I felt like to be a Christian is to be limited. So you can't do this, you can't do that. And so I think it really depends on our upbringing. When I look back at my childhood and even the beginning of my university life, I was very legalistic, okay? Very, very legalistic. And, just very by the book kind of thing. And then it's like, you try to do that, you won't be able to achieve that. Then finally, when I begin to understand the concept of conscience, and it's like they are the laws of God, they are clear laws of God, but for other things, there is a conscience. You begin to do things according to your conscience. So it's not a right or wrong kind of thing. I mean, there are certain things which are not you cannot compromise on, the 10 Commandments and things like that. But for many, many other things, like we talk about food, we talk about the movies you watch, the music you listen. We don't want to draw a hard line, but we want to see where is our heart, where is our conscience, okay? So that's something that we need to understand. And I know when people come and do FIC, they are like, you all are very restrictive. Some people start to say that to Joyce and people like that. It is not. A lot of things are based on the Word of God. And, so there are certain things cannot compromise. But for other things, there is freedom and there is liberty. So with this, we want to ask this question. What is the prophetic focus for this month? Because that's always the purpose of First Fruit. Now, before that, I want to just talk about two other things first, then we'll go back to the prophetic focus, okay? It is really this. When faced with difficult challenges, when people are being pressurized and they are just struggling with certain things, there are usually two responses. And I think this is a month we need to understand, because both these responses are basically us running away from God. So the first one, and it depends on your personality, is we work even harder. I remember I talked about strife last week and also the week before. And then we begin to develop strife. Everyone says strife. And what is strife? It's the feeling that everything that we do is never going to be enough. So, some people feel like this is motivation. But I tell you, if we stay in this mode for too long, this becomes the reality of our life. That means everything we do, there is no conclusion, there is no satisfaction. Strife will eventually lead a person to be a wanderer. Cain was a wanderer. Why? Because he started to develop serious manifestation of offense. He was offended with God, mistrust, he cannot trust anyone. And then there is an ongoing unforgiveness that becomes a generational thing. So when you study the history of Cain, and just the kind of family that he produced, actually that was the family that leads to the flood. Think about it. It's like, what happened is it will lead to the ultimate expression of humanism. You know what is humanism? I can do all things without God. That's why humanism is always, another expression is humans showing their fists to God. So we saw that before flood. After flood, immediately we saw that with Nimrod, and we saw that with Pharaoh. We saw that, from generation to generation, this spirit of humanism will come out. And that's why I just feel that this month is very important. Shevat. Shevat is a month where we have to let go of our own standards, our own emotion, so that the righteous foundation can be established. So that's one way. But the other response will be, we can shrink into the shell of our protection. So we disconnect with God and all those surrounding us. So I think about Elijah, I think about Luke Skywalker and things like that. They are just basically went into some kind of hiding. And when you look at them, why do they need to hide? Elijah just killed like a few hundred false prophets, right? He was running faster than chariot. Why is he hiding? Doesn't make sense. I mean, you look at Star Wars, you look at Luke Skywalker, that guy can kill the entire dark side by himself. What's happening? So really it is the emotion is being damaged by the spirit of fear, by the spirit of the challenges. We chose, instead of this is the way, we choose the way of the ostrich. You know what's ostrich, right? Preferring not to face with the issues at hand. Ostrich just hide the head, but the whole body is still exposed. We choose avoidance as a way to resolve conflict. Have you ever met people just avoid all the time? When you talk to them, they don't even want to look at you. So, some of this is our upbringing, it's our culture, but this is a month where we can overcome this, okay? So after a period of time, we can also become a wanderer. Interesting, right? Both leads to wanderer. But one is like, you wander without a sense of purpose. The other one, you wander and you try to scheme ways to destroy the entire world, the way of the king. Now, I find that this leads to hope defer. Now, why hope defer is an important thing for us to understand, because Malaysia, our nation, is a nation that has been inflicted by a strong spirit of hope defer. So when you study the history, it is very, very obvious. And that's why now, yesterday people said, now we are like reaching 4,000 cases. People are like being very paranoid. And actually today when I came, really I find a lot less cars today. Spring Highway, my car is like the only car for a long time, which is like almost never. And so, but you see that the spirit of hope defer is really initiated by the spirit of fear. There's that fear there, and then there's a fear of lack. There's a fear of no fulfillment. In Malaysia we have a lot of that, and eventually, if it becomes serious, it can lead to a death wish. You know what is death wish? Elijah. He say, "I want to die. I don't want to stay here anymore. Just kill me." So that is very, very serious. Okay. So we want to avoid that. So that's why it is important for us to come back and ask God, 2 more months to pass over. What do you want me to do in this month? I just felt like this month is a month to step back and just relax a little bit and don't be too kanchon, okay? And so what is the prophetic focus of this month? It is a month linked with the tribe of Asher, right? So you all know what is Asher? So what is Asher? It's pleasure, it's happiness, it's delicious things, it's a fatness. Fatness here is like good nutrient, okay? Not asking you to be fat, okay? And so that's why the prophetic focus is very different this month. It is a month where there's an emphasis on self-care. Everyone says self-care. Now let me say this, self-care is not a selfish thing. We need to be strong in the Lord in order to help others. So have you seen people that they try to do too much and then they themselves kind of collapse? So we don't want that. So the month of Shevat with the tribe of Asher is for us to focus on self-care. Now, by the way, self-care means self-care. Okay, so let me give you an example. Marriage. I know some people will be like, how can you say this? But in marriage situation, the priority, I'm not saying the only focus, okay? The two spouses should be the priority among yourself, then the children. Because I've seen so many cases where the children became the idols of the family, and then it just ruined the family. So when God called two to commit, the two spouses have the highest level of commitment. Children are under your stewardship for a period of time. By the time they are adult, you still guide them, but you no longer have full authority over them. And I think this is something the Asian mindset just find it very hard to accept, because the Asian mindset will be like, wow, my children is my children forever. So I'm 80 years old and my children is 60 years old, I'm still kind of. I mean, we've seen cases like that, it's just unbelievable. But that's the thing, we have to understand what is self-care here. See, another thing about self-care is we do it so that we can carry out a plan to bless the next generation. So this is a month really to kind of regroup, to kind of think about what you want to do for the next few months. You know, some of you know we have been doing podcasts for a while, and we just kind of like stop for a while, and we're like saying, oh, we want to do, hey, suddenly we're in the month of Shevat, you know, we want to do it again, okay? Okay, so now I want to talk about God's plan for the generations, because this is a month to consider generations. Everyone say generations. You see, our God is a God of generations, right? Now let me just begin with this. Have you ever wondered why God cares for nations and not just individuals? Now this is a concept that the church has sort of get itself confused. Because for the longest time, remember, the church had limited itself to the gospel of salvation, focusing on saved souls, right? We always have evangelistic meeting, come, everyone make a decision, let's do some emotional things so that people will come out to the stage. Ever been there? Ever been, okay, I don't want to use the word cheated, okay? Ever been persuaded to come out? Actually, I tell you, it doesn't really work, because a decision is easy, but it can mean nothing. In fact, I know a few cases, and this is a real one. I wouldn't have believed it until it happened to me, okay? So, no, not to me, but we went to a meeting, we organized a meeting, and then some people came out, and you know, this was when I was in Australia. Came out, accepted Christ, and things like that. Yeah, all good. Then the next day, they said, oh, actually, it was a mistake. I didn't really know what I was doing. Actually, you know, I'm a Buddhist. You know, I can't do this kind of thing. So I'm just trying to tell you a real example that people can come out because of the emotion of things. They see their friends come out. It just felt right. And then they don't know what they do. So that's why we have been doing that. We focus on the gospel of salvation. But that was not God's plan. You see, from the beginning, everyone say beginning. When we look at the covenant of God and we can trace it to Abraham, God's intent has always been for a formation of a godly nation. And what is this nation supposed to be? A remnant on earth to be his witness. So Acts 14:17 is a verse that I've been using the last few weeks. You know, God allowed nations to do whatever they want, but he always have a remnant, because through the remnant, he will still be able to disciple the entire earth. And that's why when we look at the one new man expression, and I think those of you who come here regularly and see our teaching, you know, we do the feast, we do the first fruit, and people are like, what the heck are you doing? And things like that. And basically, it's a one new man expression. And let me just give you a one-line summary what it is. It is really the uniting expression of the Jews and Gentiles. That's why the Gentiles will become like Jews, but you know the other way is also true. The Jews will become like Gentiles. So it's not one-way traffic. And a lot of people say, oh, we become Jews. No, God is creating a new expression. But he is using Israel as a prototype nation, the natural Israel and the spiritual Israel. That's why the replacement theology, which is so prevalent, started even Reformation, people like Luther, Calvin, they are into replacement theology, because they felt like the church has replaced spiritual Israel. So that's why you see many people who adopt this kind of teaching, they don't even read Old Testament. They say Old Testament is problematic. But then how do you reconcile verses like 2 Timothy 3:16, all scriptures, right, are useful for, etc., etc. And that scripture is referring to Torah and Old Testament, not even New Testament. So that's why we have to understand the one new man expression, it is God's intent. He intended both to be grafted together. Israel remains the original olive tree. So we need to understand this. Otherwise, it will be very hard to go forward. And the purpose is to disciple nations. It is to complete the dominion mandate which God gave Adam. He didn't fulfill it. But today, God is asking the church. That's why before Jesus returns, remember in Matthew it says that the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached to all nations. Then the end will come. So, I mean, when you think about all these things, it looks like a very exciting time for us, right? So it looks like the church finally will be able to express the gospel of kingdom in all nations. Right? I mean, think about it. I mean, we have not even begun yet, okay? So that's why when we talk about generations, we have to think about this. We may not complete it, but we need to prepare our next generations for that. Okay, when we choose to become this generation's remnant, so I believe many people are here, you are connected to our teaching, and what we do is because you are concerned about the next generation. You want to be remnant. What is actually happening is we are signing up for a battle to ensure the future of the next generation. So it's very interesting, right? Some people is like, oh, I'm only 20 plus and things like that. Why do I need to think about the next generation? Let me just say this. The sooner you start, the more impact you will have. You can have impact over the third and fourth and fifth generation. So we need to think and develop plans that will sustain the generations. I see some people are like thinking different things. So one of the things to begin to think about is really the natural and spiritual legacy. What do I have now? What can I develop that I can pass on? Because I think we have to be very serious. And this really kind of hit me when I was, when I was in university. I start to have this kind of understanding because all of a sudden I realized, hey, we're not going to be here for a long time. It's like what we do here, is it going to have impact until the next generation? And that suddenly caused you to have an urgency, and you want to do things. What can we pass on to the next generation? That's why this month, the month of Shevat, it is a month for the generations to align. That means, whatever generation you are, maybe you are in the older generations, the 70s, the 80s, maybe you are in a sort of middle-aged generation. I don't know what is the definition of middle-age these days, okay? And maybe you are the young generations, maybe you are the married but not quite middle-aged. There's a different category. But all the generations need to come together to realign. Why? Because there is a greater purpose of God. This is a month we can begin to regroup. That's why I just felt like prophetically, it's going to be a month where we can just step back. There won't be a lot of things to do, but there will be a lot of things to think and consider. This is the month we can begin to ask the Lord for strategies that will cause a new generation to be raised up. And sometimes we just need to quiet down, accept the ways of God. Because remember, going back to the earlier portion, we have to recognize that God's way, it is the way. This is the way that will allow us to begin to download things. Okay, so guess what? This is a very short teaching. Last slide already. So I want to just say, Shevat, actually I look at Shevat every year. Short teaching. It's not a formula, but it's just like that. The dealing of God is like that. And every time, when I reach there, I always look at all my slides. Enough? That's it. So I'm kind of like, because it's a month to really step back. And then next month, when you look at next month, Adar is very different. Adar is very intense. Adar is a month where we really need to choose to cross over. But this is a month, the Lord requires a change of pace. So change your pace. So suddenly work from home, or maybe not work from home. I don't know what is your industry, but it's very different. Nevertheless, in the change of pace, we need to choose the higher ways of God. Now remember, I kept using the word choose, choice, because it is. God cannot make you choose His ways. You have to make it. I had to make it. We need to recharge and allow the worship of God to cleanse our emotion. So that's the purpose of First Fruit. Every time we come here, we allow our emotions to be realigned again. We need to begin to hear from God in a new and fresh way again. So it's like, in last season, you have been very successful in one way, but God is saying that I have other ways to speak to you. I have other ways to show the revelation. This is one of the months where God is gearing us up for Passover. Because let me tell you what's going to happen in Passover, okay? Passover, remember, is a 6-month point for 5781. Remember 5781, what is it about? The year of contention, Lion of Judah and the red dragon. So I tell you, we have not even begun to see that. So that's why after Passover, this is what I believe will happen. There will be a great spiritual contention. And that's why this month and next month is really the last 2 months for us to sort of prepare ourselves. So I just want to encourage you, we do not need to be afraid. This is all part of the process. It can look a bit messy and things like that. But it will begin to cause us to see what do we need to prioritize. And I've been looking at my own life structure, my own values and things like that. Certain things I do, and certain things I don't want to do it anymore. And certain things I want to do more. So this is a month to really review in such a way, allowing the voice of God to come and cleanse us, okay? So that's why as we finish this month, going into Adar, we're going to have FIC at the end of February. So I think it's really a great time. I want to encourage those of you, especially if you have not joined for a while, do come and sign up. And I believe we'll be able to meet on site, okay? All right. So Lord, I just pray right now, in this month, Lord, cause us to choose your ways. Help us to see that there is a higher way. There is a superior way. And I just feel like the Lord is saying that in these moments of quietness, in these moments of reflections, if you will choose my higher ways, then I will be able to open up a path that causes you to be able to pass on what you have and to begin to even develop what you have that will become useful for the next generation. So I heard the Lord say that this is a time when many of you can upgrade. And even though you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I just see the gifts of teaching are being upgraded, the gifts of miracles are being upgraded. And the Lord says that for many of you, you just need to begin to accept my ways and begin to impart what you have. So I just pray we'll begin to do that in this month of Shevat. All right, so that's it for today. It's a very short meeting. You feel free to do your communion, eat whatever you want. Remember, this is a month of Asher. And do sign up for FIC, okay?